It was supposed to be a small gesture of kindness, the kind you offer when you don't expect it to matter. But kindness, when soaked in condescension, is a strange poison. Vivian Carlisle didn't think twice when she invited her driver's daughter to join the beginner's ballet experience she was hosting for charity. After all, the girl was from a different background, as Vivian liked to phrase it, and surely she'd never had the opportunity to step into the marbled elegance of the Carlisle estate's private ballroom. What Vivian didn't know was that Nia Thompson had been dancing since she was 3, and not just dancing winning. The day began with the sky hanging low over Manhattan, gray and heavy like a curtain waiting to rise. The Carlisle residence sat at the edge of Central Park, its facade gleaming white against the clouds. Drivers lined the circular driveway, each standing by their gleaming cars in pressed uniforms. Among them was Samuel Thompson, posture sharp, eyes steady, his hands clasped behind his back. Inside the Bentley he'd driven that morning, his daughter Nia sat quietly, her hands folded over a canvas duffel bag. It was the same bag she carried to every practice, scuffed at the corners, a faint dusting of chalk still clinging to the zipper. She didn't say much, not to her father, not to anyone, because she knew that in places like this, silence was safer. Vivian's assistant, a brisk woman in a beige suit, approached the car. "Mrs. Carlisle is ready for you," she said, smiling the way people do when they're trying to make you feel comfortable without actually caring whether you are. Nia stepped out, feeling the cold air bite her skin. She followed the assistant into the house, her sneakers squeaking against the marble foyer. Crystal chandeliers spilled light onto the sweeping staircase, and the faint scent of expensive perfume floated in the air like an invisible warning. Vivian Carlisle descended the staircase with the ease of someone who had never rushed in her life. She was elegance carved in motion, tailored silk dress, diamonds like frost along her neck, hair swept into a glossy chignon. "Nia, darling," she said, drawing out the vowels as if savoring them. "So lovely to meet you. Your father tells me you've never tried ballet." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Nia looked Vivian straight in the eye. "I've danced before." "Oh, how wonderful." Vivian's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, today will be such a treat. We're going to teach you the basics." She turned, gesturing for Nia to follow. The ballroom opened up before them, a cathedral of glass and gold. White roses lined the mirrored walls, and an ivory grand piano sat in the corner, waiting. A group of young girls, all in pristine leotards and satin slippers, clustered near the bar. They paused their chatter to watch Nia walk in. One of them, tall, blonde, with a pearl headband, whispered something to her friend. They both giggled. The instructor, a thin man in black with a posture like a ruler, clapped his hands. "Positions, ladies," he called. "We have a special guest today." Nia moved to the far end of the bar, feeling their eyes on her. She wasn't wearing the uniform, just black leggings and a faded t-shirt, but she didn't care. Vivian lingered by the doorway, arms crossed, a satisfied expression on her face, as if she were about to witness a charming little charity moment. She imagined herself telling the story later at lunch. "Oh, I gave my driver's daughter her very first ballet lesson. She was adorable." The music began, a soft, tinkling piano, and the girls lifted into first position. The instructor moved down the line, adjusting shoulders, straightening knees. When he reached Nia, he opened his mouth to correct her, then paused. Her posture was perfect. "Have you done this before?" he asked, brow raised. Nia's answer was quiet but clear. "Yes." They began the plies. Nia's movements were precise, smooth, each bend and rise seamless. By the time they reached Tindus, she had slipped into her rhythm, the one that lived in her muscles, the one her body remembered even when her mind didn't try. The other girls began stealing glances, their whispers fading into a silent, uneasy recognition. Vivian noticed the shift, but didn't yet understand it. She was still smiling faintly when the instructor called for grand jetés across the floor. "Ladies, one at a time," he instructed. "Show me your leap." The first girl stumbled slightly. The second managed a decent jump, though her landing wobbled. Then it was Nia's turn. She took 3 running steps, her sneakers whispering against the polished floor, and leapt. It was not the leap of a beginner. It was the kind that steals breath, the kind that makes a room forget to blink. She soared, legs slicing into a perfect split midair, toes pointed like an arrow toward the sky, before landing silently, effortlessly. The instructor's mouth opened, then closed again. Vivian's smile faltered. Samuel stood in the corner, watching, his chest tight, with something between pride and dread. He'd told Nia not to show off. Not here. Not in front of people who would twist her talent into a story about themselves. But his daughter had always been like this, quiet until the moment came, then impossible to ignore. The instructor cleared his throat. Again, he said, but his voice was softer now. Nia leapt again. Higher. Cleaner. A movement that didn't just defy gravity, but seemed to refuse the weight of the room's assumptions. By the third leap, even the girls who had giggled were staring. Vivian's hands slowly lowered from where they'd been clasped at her waist. She had wanted a moment of her generosity, and instead, she was watching a revelation that didn't belong to her. The room had shifted. It wasn't loud or obvious, but Nia could feel it, that subtle change in the air when people realized the story they've been telling themselves no longer fits. The girls along the bar weren't smirking anymore. The instructor's face had settled into a careful neutrality, as if he was trying to process what he'd just seen without letting it show. And Vivian looked like someone who'd been handed a gift she didn't want but couldn't politely return. Nia returned to her place at the bar, her face calm, her body loose. Inside, though, there was a small flicker, not pride exactly, but a quiet satisfaction that came from reminding herself she belonged anywhere her feet could carry her. Let's move to Adagio, the instructor announced, trying to regain control of the tempo of the afternoon. The music shifted, slower and richer, and they began a series of controlled develops. Nia's leg rose effortlessly, her balance unwavering even on the slick floor, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the mirrors. She wasn't dancing for them. She wasn't dancing at them. She was dancing because it was the only place she felt like she could fully exist without asking permission. Vivian's voice cut into the music. Hold on, she said, stepping forward. That was very impressive, Nia. Where exactly did you say you'd danced before? I didn't, Nia replied. Samuel's eyes darted to his daughter, a warning, but Nia didn't flinch. Vivian's smile was tight. Well, we have a lot of girls here who've been training for years. It's important to understand that ballet isn't just hopping around. I know, Nia said simply. Something in Vivian's tone made the instructor shift uncomfortably. Mrs. Carlyle, she's doing just fine, he said, his voice carefully polite. But Vivian wasn't done. She looked Nia over the worn clothes, the absence of satin slippers, and there was a flicker in her eyes, something that wasn't quite admiration. You move beautifully, she said, but there's a refinement that takes, well, time and resources. Not everyone has money. Nia finished for her. The air in the room froze. One of the younger girls giggled nervously, but stopped when the instructor shot her a sharp look. Samuel shifted his weight, his jaw tightening. He'd seen this dance before, not the kind with music and mirrors, but the one where people dressed their judgments in compliments. Vivian's smile faltered. I just meant that I don't look like I belong here, Nia said. Her voice wasn't angry, but it was steady. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the instructor clapped his hands sharply. All right, from the top, he said, as if he could choreograph the tension away. The rest of the lesson passed in a strange kind of silence. Nia kept moving, her body flowing through each combination, but she could feel Vivian's eyes on her, measuring, reassessing. The other girls glanced between them like spectators at a match they didn't fully understand but knew was important. When the final curtsy was done, the instructor dismissed them. The girls scattered, gathering their bags, pulling on coats. Nia slipped her sneakers back on and slung her duffel over her shoulder. Vivian approached. Nia, she began, her voice softer now. I hope you didn't take what I said the wrong way. Nia met her gaze. What way was that? Vivian hesitated. She wasn't used to being asked to explain herself. I was trying to say, you have talent. Raw talent. With the right guidance, you could. She trailed off, searching for the right word. Shine. I already do, Nia said. Samuel stepped in then, his voice calm but edged. Mrs. Carlyle, we should be going. Vivian looked between them, her expression unreadable. Of course. Thank you for coming, Nia. I hope you'll consider joining us again. Nia didn't answer. She followed her father out, their footsteps echoing against the marble until the heavy door closed behind them. The cold air hit her like a clean break from the room they'd just left. Samuel unlocked the car, but didn't get in right away. He stood by the driver's side, looking at his daughter. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Do what? Call her out like that? People like her. They hear what they want to hear." Nia's grip on her duffel tightened. "If I don't say it, they think it's true." They drove in silence for a while, the city sliding past in flashes of light and shadow. Samuel stole a glance at her in the rearview mirror. She was staring out the window, her face calm, but he could tell her mind was turning over the day like a stone in her hand. "You were good in there," he said finally. "I was me in there," she replied. The next day, Vivian couldn't stop thinking about the girl. Something about the way Nia had carried herself, not just in the jumps and turns, but in the stillness, lingered in her mind. She found herself replaying the moment when Nia corrected her, the way the room had shifted, the way she'd felt suddenly exposed in a way she hadn't expected. She'd invited the girl expecting gratitude. Instead, she'd gotten truth. And truth, Vivian realized, was a mirror she wasn't sure she liked looking into. By the end of the week, whispers had started among her social circle. A few of the mothers whose daughters had been at the lesson mentioned the driver's girl, some with surprise, some with thinly veiled resentment. One of them even joked, "Well, at least she gave our girls something to aspire to," her tone making it clear she didn't mean it as a compliment. Vivian listened, sipping her wine, but said nothing. Later that night, alone in her study, she opened her laptop and typed Nia's name into a search bar. The results hit her like a slap. National Youth Ballet Championship winner, Nia Thompson. 3-time regional gold medalist. Feature article, "The prodigy who dances like she's telling the truth." Photo after photo appeared Nia on stage, mid-leap, her face lit with the kind of focus that can't be taught. She wasn't just good. She was extraordinary. Vivian sat back in her chair, the glow of the screen washing over her. She thought of her own daughter, who had been in that same room, her lines clean but her passion rehearsed. She thought of the way Samuel had stood silently by the wall, watching, as if he'd been carrying this truth for years, unseen by the people who rode in the back seat of his car. And she thought of the way she'd spoken to Nia, the assumptions wrapped neatly in silk, the smile that had hidden a dozen unspoken judgments. For the first time in a long while, Vivian felt ashamed. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Nia's leap, the way her body had cut through the air like it belonged there. Not because someone had opened the door for her, but because she'd built her own way in. By morning, Vivian had made a decision, one that would not sit comfortably with her friends, but that was starting to feel less like charity and more like atonement. She picked up her phone and called Samuel. "Mr. Thompson," she said when he answered, "I need to speak with your daughter." "In person." Samuel hesitated before answering. "With all due respect, Mrs. Carlyle, Nia's not interested in being anyone's project." "This isn't a project," Vivian said quickly, but she heard the weakness in her own voice. I realized I made a mistake. I want to make it right." There was a long pause. She could hear the faint hum of traffic on his end, the weight of his silence pressing through the line. "I'll tell her you called," he said at last, his tone even. "But whether she talks to you, that's her choice." The call ended. Nia found out later that evening. Samuel had just set down a plate of baked chicken and green beans when he told her. She didn't look up from her homework. She said what? "She wants to meet," he replied, sitting across from her. Nia stabbed a green bean with her fork. "Why? So she can tell me again how much I need her guidance?" Samuel didn't smile. "She says she wants to make it right." Nia's laugh was short and humorless. "People like her don't want to make things right. They want to feel better about themselves." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I'm not telling you what to do. I just think sometimes facing people is its own kind of victory." She was quiet for a long moment, chewing slowly. "If I go," she said finally, "it'll be on my terms." The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon at the Carlyle estate again. This time, Nia walked in wearing her competition leotard beneath a loose hoodie, her hair pulled into a sharp bun. She carried the same scuffed duffel, but her steps were deliberate, measured. Vivian was waiting in the grand sitting room, dressed more simply than before. No diamonds, no sweeping silk, just a cream sweater and tailored trousers. The absence of ostentation was almost more noticeable than its presence. "Thank you for coming," Vivian began. Nia stayed standing. "You wanted to talk?" Vivian nodded. "I owe you an apology. The other day, I assumed things about you that I had no right to assume. I thought I was offering you an opportunity, when in fact you've earned more than I could have given." Nia said nothing, her gaze steady. Vivian continued, her voice quieter. "I saw your performances online. You're remarkable. And I realized that in trying to help you, I was really just putting myself in the center of your story. That was wrong." For a moment, Nia almost softened. But then she remembered the whispers, the polite smile, the subtle sting of those words. With the right guidance, you could shine. "You don't know me," Nia said. "You saw one leap and decided what I needed. And maybe you meant well, but you didn't ask. You just assumed that because of where I come from, I couldn't already be everything I am." Vivian's eyes flickered, as if each word landed heavier than the last. "You're right," she admitted. "I was blind to that. And I want to make amends." Nia crossed her arms. "And how do you plan to do that?" Vivian drew a breath. "There's a gala performance at the Metropolitan Ballet next month. The audience will be the city's elite. I'm on the organizing board. I want you to perform as the featured soloist." Samuel, who had been silent by the doorway, spoke up then. "And what would that do for her? A room full of people who'll clap politely and go home thinking they've just watched a charity case." Vivian shook her head. "No, I don't want it framed that way. I want them to see her for what she is, a champion. No introductions about her background. No commentary. Just the art. Let them be caught off guard." Nia studied her for a long moment. She could feel the flicker of something, maybe not trust, but curiosity. The thought of stepping onto that stage, in front of people who'd never expect her to belong there, sent a quiet spark through her. "Fine," Nia said at last. "But on one condition. I pick the piece, and I don't answer to anyone about how I dance it." Vivian nodded without hesitation. "Agreed." The weeks that followed were a storm of rehearsals. Nia chose a contemporary piece laced with classical technique, something that would unsettle purists while forcing them to acknowledge her skill. She practiced at the modest local studio she'd always used, the floorboards worn smooth under her feet, mirrors streaked with fingerprints. Vivian visited once, quietly watching from the corner. She didn't interrupt, didn't advise, didn't offer notes. She simply stood there, hands clasped, absorbing the sight of Nia in her own element. It struck her then that this was what she had missed before, the understanding that talent didn't need permission from wealth to exist. The night of the gala arrived with a biting February wind. The Metropolitan Ballet's lobby glowed with chandeliers, its marble floors polished to a mirror sheen. Guests in tuxedos and evening gowns sipped champagne, exchanging air kisses and practiced laughter. Backstage, Nia stretched in the shadows, headphones over her ears, blocking out the hum of voices beyond the curtain. Samuel stood nearby, hands in his pockets, his pride disguised as casual watchfulness. Vivian moved between them and the stage manager, ensuring everything was in place. She caught Samuel's eye, and for a brief moment, they shared a nod, not friendship, exactly, but a recognition of shared purpose. The program began with the usual fare, sweeping core pieces, delicate pas de deux, all performed with polished precision. Applause rose and fell in measured waves. Then the announcer's voice echoed through the theater. "Please welcome our next soloist, Nia Thompson." No introduction, no backstory, just a name. When the curtain rose, the audience saw a lone figure in a simple black leotard, barefoot, her posture both grounded and ready to explode. The music began, a haunting piano melody layered with an undercurrent of strings. Nia moved like the music was spilling out of her bones. Her extensions were clean, her turns razor-sharp, but it was the breath in her dancing that caught them, the pauses that held more weight than the movement. The way her gaze swept the room as if challenging them to look away. In the second section, she folded classical arabesques into fluid, contemporary sweeps of her arms, her body bending in ways that broke the rigid lines of tradition without losing their beauty. She was telling a story without words, and even those who didn't know ballet could feel it. By the time she leapt into the final sequence, 3 soaring jetés that seemed to suspend in midair, the audience was no longer clapping politely. They were holding their breath. She landed. The music faded, and the theater was silent for a heartbeat before the applause erupted louder, longer, more unrestrained than anything else that night. Nia didn't bow deeply. She stood there for a moment, meeting their eyes, before giving a small nod and stepping off stage. Back in the wings, Samuel wrapped an arm around her shoulders. That, he said softly, was yours. Vivian approached, her expression almost humbled. They'll be talking about you for a long time, she said. Nia looked at her. Good. Let them. Later, in the lobby, the wealthy patrons murmured to each other. Some asked, where did she train? Others wondered why they hadn't heard her name before. And a few, uncomfortable in ways they couldn't articulate, avoided the topic entirely. But one thing was certain. They would never forget the sight of her cutting through the air like she owned it. And she did. The next morning, Nia woke to dozens of messages. Some were from friends and fellow dancers who had seen the performance posted online overnight. Others were from strangers who'd stumbled across the clip, already shared thousands of times. The comments were a blur of awe, surprise, and somity-messed thinly veiled shock of people who hadn't expected her to be the one commanding the stage. One message caught her attention more than the others. It was from a girl she didn't know, her profile picture a brown-skinned teenager in ballet slippers. I saw you last night. I've been thinking about quitting because nobody like me makes it this far. But seeing you, maybe I'll stay. Nia stared at it for a long time, her chest tight. She didn't reply right away. She wasn't sure she could find the right words, but she felt the weight of it settle inside her, warm and steady. At the Carlisle estate, Vivian sat at her breakfast table, untouched toast cooling beside her coffee. The society pages had already begun covering the gala, and while most articles barely mentioned her role on the organizing board, her name appeared in connection with Nia's performance. She'd expected to feel satisfied, perhaps even proud of herself. Instead, she felt something stranger, relief that she hadn't stood in the way. She realized now that her initial invitation to Nia had been about control, about placing herself at the center of a narrative she had no right to claim. This time, she'd stepped aside. Her phone buzzed. It was Samuel. They met later that afternoon in the same sitting room where Vivian had first apologized. Samuel arrived in his uniform, but there was a different ease in his shoulders now, a subtle change in the way he met her eyes. Mrs. Carlisle, he said, I wanted to thank you for last night. Vivian shook her head. You don't owe me thanks. That was all her. Samuel smiled faintly. I know. But you gave her a stage without strings. That matters. They spoke for a while about the performance, the reaction, the way Nia had carried herself. Before leaving, Samuel hesitated at the door. You know, he said, when you first invited her to that lesson, I thought you just wanted to feel good about yourself. Maybe you did. But you also gave her a chance to prove something to people who didn't even know they needed to be proven wrong. Vivian didn't argue. She just nodded. Meanwhile, Nia was back in her regular studio, the scuffed floorboards beneath her feet feeling more like home than any stage could. She didn't talk much about the gala. To her, it wasn't about the applause, it was about the look in the audience's eyes when the assumptions fell away. During a break, her instructor, an older woman who had trained her since childhood, handed her a folded clipping from the paper. Thought you might want this, she said. The article's headline read, Unknown Soloist Captures Gala Spotlight. Beneath it was a photo of Nia mid-leap, her body suspended in perfect form. The word unknown made her smile. They wouldn't be able to use that word forever. A week later, Vivian sent her an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. Nia, no speeches. No charity. Just an offer. There's a summer residency at the Paris Conservatory. If you want it, it's yours. Completely on your terms. V. Beneath the note was the acceptance letter, already signed. Nia read it twice, then tucked it back into the envelope. She didn't answer right away. She wasn't sure yet if she wanted to go on it because she doubted her ability, but because she had learned something powerful. The stage wasn't a gift someone handed her. It was something she claimed. And she could claim it anywhere. On a quiet Sunday morning, Samuel and Nia took a walk through Central Park. The trees were just beginning to show the first hints of spring. You going to take that Paris thing? He asked. Maybe, Nia said. But I also like the idea of making my own stage here. For kids who don't get invited to places like the Carlisle's ballroom. Places where they don't think they belong until they walk in and prove they do. Samuel nodded slowly, pride warming his voice. That's the best kind of victory. The kind you share. Months passed. The gala performance continued to circulate online, gaining traction in dance forums, then in mainstream media. People debated her technique, her style, her refusal to fit neatly into tradition. But for every critic, There were twice as many voices calling her an innovator, a force. One evening, Vivian attended another high society event. She overheard two women speaking about that girl from the gala. "Where did she come from?" one asked. "Does it matter?" the other replied. She was unforgettable. Vivian smiled to herself and didn't correct them. For once, she didn't feel the need to insert herself into the story. The last time Vivian saw Nia that year was at a small community showcase in Harlem. No chandeliers, no marble, just folding chairs and a creaky wooden stage. Nia was performing with a group of young dancers, some barely tall enough to reach the bar. Vivian sat in the back, unnoticed, watching as Nia moved with the same precision and fire she'd had at the gala. When the performance ended, the audience, family, neighbors, friends stood and clapped, their applause carrying the same warmth as the one in the Grand Theater, maybe more. As the crowd began to disperse, Nia spotted her. She walked over, a knowing smile on her face. "You didn't announce yourself?" Nia said. "Didn't need to," Vivian replied. "I came to watch, not to be seen." Nia tilted her head. "You've learned something." "From the best," Vivian admitted. That night, as Vivian left the modest community center, she thought back to the first day she'd met Nia. The patronizing smile, the assumptions, the small box she'd tried to place her in. It felt like a lifetime ago. She realized then that the performance at the gala hadn't just changed the audience, sight had changed her. And perhaps that was Nia's quietest victory of all. Months later, a new headline appeared in the New York Times. "Champion dancer opens youth ballet program for underrepresented communities." In the accompanying photo, Nia stood in a bright, airy studio, surrounded by a circle of children in mismatched dancewear. She was laughing, mid-demonstration, her body in perfect alignment as tiny hands tried to mimic her pose. Samuel stood in the background, leaning against the wall with a look of quiet satisfaction. The caption read, "Nia Thompson teaches the next generation that the stage belongs to them, too." Somewhere, in a grand apartment overlooking Central Park, Vivian clipped that article and placed it beside the one from the gala. Not as trophies, but as reminders. Because in the end, the story hadn't been about her generosity or even about Nia's victory in a single performance. It was about dismantling the unspoken boundaries between worlds, and the moment a girl who had nothing to prove walked into a ballroom, leapt into the air, and changed everything. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.